Hi everybody, welcome back. We're ready for the next lesson, so I'd like to talk about loops today. May not seem like the most important thing on your agenda. However, it really is important when you're making quality jewelry to be able to do all the steps correctly. So what I'd like to go over today is the way that we make a loop that's even and tightly coiled and looks finished, as opposed to something like this, which I see a lot of out there, where the coils are kind of hanging down the neck, not looking real tidy. Things like this where the loops are sort of misshapen or oddly shapen or off to one side and things aren't maybe quite hanging right. If you learn how to make a proper loop, you won't have those problems. Especially when it comes to making earrings or findings of any kind. If your loops are straight and correct, you'll have a much better finished product. So the question is, how do we go from wonky loop to correct loop? So that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to use 20 gauge wire to do these. I pretty much use 20 gauge wire for most things that require a base wire weight or something that's sturdy. If you get too small in your gauge, these aren't going to hold up well. I am using a dead soft wire for these because it makes it so much easier to make these lay correctly when you're using a dead soft wire. And don't worry about it, because as you work with it and as you bend it and you wrap it, it will harden up to a point where it's going to be fairly stable. You're not going to have to worry about, excuse me, about it opening up or, you know, bending out of shape or anything like that. These do hold up just fine. So that's what we're going to do today. The tools that we're going to need, you need your ruler, you need wire, of course. We're going to use round nose pliers, and I use my chain nose pliers, but you can certainly use these flat pliers if you have these. They will also work. And of course you need your cutters and a file and your clickable Sharpie, which I talked about in the first video about what you really need, the basic things to get started. This is a nice add-on to have. If you don't have this, you know, a regular ink pen will probably work for you, or a regular Sharpie would be fine too. So let's get started. I already know, because I've done quite a bit of this, which is really the only way to get proficient at making loops, is to make a whole bunch over and over and over again. But I already know that I need about 3.5 inches of wire to make what I'm going to show you. Okay, and the reason that I'm doing it this way is because rather than just show you how to make a loop and then you have a bunch of pieces of wire with loops on the end, I'm actually going to show you how to make a link, and then hopefully you'll practice by making a chain. Because once you've done, this is actually called a barrel chain because it wraps back over the top of itself. So once you've done, you know, a few dozen feet of chain, you should be proficient at making the loops, and you'll understand what I mean, that these things come with practice. And the only way, really, I see people in wire group a lot ask about how people become proficient, or, you know, how did you get so good at doing this, or why can you do this and I can't do this? And I'm going to tell you right now the difference, you know, in a standard procedural thing like this is just practice. It's just because I've made thousands of these little loops now. That's how you get good at anything. So I will show you how I do it, but the practice is on you. So if you don't get it the first time, you know, do it a few thousand more times, and then and then you should have it down. Okay, so let's get started with this. Now, when you do this, the length of your wire will be determined by the size of your loop, okay, and what you're trying to accomplish with it. So my loop, let me just tell you, It's about 3.5, 4 millimeter loop. Okay, so it will change depending on if you're making a larger loop, you're going to need a longer length of wire. If you wrap it around itself more times than I do, you're going to need a longer length of wire. So it's kind of an experimental thing when you first start to figure out where you need to be, and then once you have it, then you kind of know from there. So what I'm going to do is, and I just finished this chain, so you can kind of see a faint line on my round nose pliers, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to remark that so that you can see it well. And remember too that most of these round nose pliers, there we go, there's actually a slight difference from one side to the other in terms of size. So you can't switch from one side to the other. You have to consistently use the same side of the plier to make your loop, or they will not be the same. Okay, and when we're trying to repeat a size, that's important, is to always use the same spot on the same side of the plier. Okay, now because of the way that this loop is finished, we're going to start not quite halfway down the wire. So let's say you need to go about 1.5 inches. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a bend in this wire at about 45 degrees. It doesn't need to be specific, okay, but it's going to look a bit like that. And you could do this with your flat pliers too, which I do sometimes. It doesn't really matter as long as you're putting that angle in your wire. Okay, and the reason that we do that is because that is what's going to help that loop be centered over. I'm just going to refer to the straight part as the base of the wire. Okay, so we'll say you have the base and you have the loop and then you have a coil at the top, just so I'm clear about what we're talking about. So in order to get that loop to set centered over the base, you need to start with this angle and give that wire a place to go as you wrap it around. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. Okay, so then the next thing you do is you're going to just take the wire and put it in the jaw of your pliers. Okay, and you want to get it as close to that mark as you can get it. It's very hard to see because I have to work so close to the camera, and that's between me, and so it's hard for me to see. But you want to get as close to that line as you can get. And then what I do with wire, because again, it's metal and it acts like metal, don't grab it back here and try to pull it around the plier. You won't have a lot of luck that way. Just take this finger and push it up over the round part of the plier. Okay, now you'll come to a point where you can't really go any further. Okay, so you're going to open the jaw and finish your circle. And I like to come a little bit further. Okay, now if you look at it just from there, you can see that the center of the loop is aligned with that base wire. Okay, so then what I do, grab either pair of your flat pliers. Now we're not trying to crimp this, we're not trying to kill this, all we're doing is holding this steady. Okay, so too much pressure on this, you're going to leave marks in your wire, and that's not going to look nice. Another thing you may notice is that my wire is actually slightly pointing to the right. Okay, so it's actually over, it's not a 90-degree angle, it's actually further than that. Okay, and the reason that I do it that way is because if you start your wire off in the direction that you want it to go, it'll be much easier to wrap it and have those loops be tight together. Okay, so again, rather than grabbing the end of this and pulling it, what I'm doing is I'm going to hold my thumb here and use this finger, and I'm just pushing this. Okay, you want to always be pushing, sort of folding it really tightly and really close around Okay, so these coils, you want these to sit close together. There shouldn't be a space in here. There shouldn't be a big gap. There shouldn't be, you know, you shouldn't be seeing that base wire underneath. These should sit right next to each other and be completely aligned, as opposed to something like this, which this is a mistake that I see a lot of people make and not know how to correct. Okay, part of it comes from pulling the wire. Part of it comes from the wire sort of being at a funky angle to the way that you're trying to wrap it. So again, if this little tail of wire were angled up toward the top, it would be more likely that when you wrap this around, it's going to lay close to the wrap above. Okay, and again, some things you just have to try so that you can see what I'm really talking about. Okay, and then I'm going to continue to push this. See, right tight together. Now, if these start to, drift apart, take a second and just take your pliers and squeeze them back together. Do this gently, because if you squeeze too hard, you have a tendency to slip off, and that's, for me, that's usually when I get hurt. So, not too much pressure, gentle pressure, just enough to move that wire. And I'm going to finish this up because it's a short tail, and it's now, I actually really cut this close, but if I were to try to push this with my finger, it's going to be a little bit painful to do that. So I'm going to use the pliers and finish wrapping that around. And again, I'm not grabbing the end of it and pulling it down. What I'm doing is I'm using the pliers to push it. So I'm pressing it inward so it closes off. Okay. So that would be if you were doing an earring, if this were a head pin and you were doing a loop where you were going to connect it to an earring, that would be it. That would be your loop. You put your beads on, you make your loop, and you connect it to your ear wire, and you're good to go. So normally that's the full process. And of course, you know, you want to give it a little straightening when you're finished. And that's a pretty straight, pretty solid loop. So you can feel confident if you put some stones on a wire like this and put a loop like this on it, it's not going anywhere. That's going to be nice and tight. That's going to stay closed. And that's the reason why, of all of the links that I've ever made for chain, I really prefer this one the best, because it doesn't come apart. Okay, so then to complete the loop for the chain that we're going to make, which again looks like that, it's a little bit different. It's a two-ended little jobby. So we're going to go back in here, and what I do, you have to start this loop the same way that you started the other, with the angle in your wire and what have you. So I just grab it with these pliers, give it a little push, same thing, same angle. Get your round nose pliers, come back to the same point. You want to make sure that this is straight in here so that you're making your loops so that they line up. You want it to be kind of flat, rather than having your loops twisted into, well, that would be a different look, but, you know, for right now we're working on control, so try to get these so that they line up exactly. So again, we're going to come all the way around and sort of just a little further than perpendicular. Okay. And now what you want to do, and hopefully you'll be able to see this on here, is we're going to wrap right over top. Same process. So that first loop is kind of over the base wire. And then as you come around, push with your thumb, and you'll see that these loops, these coils are going to sit right on top of the other ones. Okay, and then you'll reach a point where you can't go any further. Both sides are kind of filled up, as it were. So you don't have room for another wrap, so you know you have to end it. Okay, so what you're going to do is take your flush cutters and trim off that little bit. See, and that's how closely I actually have measured that, because I know, what is that, about 1/4 inch? Play around with it, give yourself extra room. You know, start with 4 or 4.5 inches, whatever, so that you have enough to finish your loop. And then you can kind of gauge by how much you're cutting off each time what you really need in terms of length. Okay, and then take your file and this little, I'm trying to turn this so that you can see it, that little tail that sticks out. Okay, even though we've used flush cutters, that's going to have a little pokey edge on it. And because this is going to be probably in contact with flesh, you want to just file that off. Smooth it out so you don't have a rough edge. My pliers are stuck together now. Okay. And then just take that little bit right there and press it down. And you may have to turn this and press it again. And then go back and feel it with your finger. If you can feel that, you know, you're not going to want that rubbing on someone's neck. So you'll either have to try to get in there with your file, and that's why I say file it before you tuck it in, because it's much easier than trying to file against your finger in between the loop and all that. But if it's in danger of poking anyone, obviously you need to go back and file it. But that's how it finishes off. So you can see that it looks like a complete loop. My loops are the same size. The coiled part is tight together. There's nothing sticking out. And there you go. So when you do your second one, let me grab another piece of wire here. And I'm just going to do this pretty quickly. Just to show you that as you gain proficiency, this kind of thing is not always going to be as time consuming as it is when you're learning. One thing I forgot to mention is that when you are making these loops, if you're crossing over to the left, always cross over to the left. Always go the same direction. Because in the end, whatever direction you choose to go, it's going to make your work that much more consistent, which is important. And again, you're pushing, not pulling. It's almost a folding motion. Okay, now I have a little too much tail sticking out. I got it off just a little bit. So we're going to trim that off. You don't really need to file this one because it's going to be covered up, but you should press it down so that it lays nicely. Okay, and then from there, I'm going to put that bend again, just like we did the first time. Back to the round nose. Get it lined up. And come over, and again I'm crossing over the same direction, so my base is on the right, so I'm crossing over toward the left. Go a bit beyond. Okay, and now This is where you link these two together before you finish that loop off. Okay, and then same procedure, just make sure you're not crushing your first loop with the pliers, so make sure that's free. And then again, not too much pressure from the plier, we're just holding it, we're not trying to squeeze anything, we're just holding it. And you wrap that over the top. And just a little tail. I'm going to trim that. And come back with the file. Smooth it out, feel it, check it with your finger, make sure that that edge doesn't feel problematic. And then we're going to come in here and just press. And if you follow the direction of the twist and move your pliers in that same direction, you'll have a lot better luck. Feels good. So there's two links. So that's how we go about that. So I wanted to give you a project that you could do, practicing your loops, making something that's wearable, without getting ahead of ourselves and talking about how to make a head pin and so forth and so on. Okay, so there's your chain. If you want to make a bracelet length, that's fine. If you want to make, 10 feet of this, fantastic. It's really nice to put a handmade chain on a finished piece, especially if it's a high-end piece, or if you're using an expensive stone, and you really want to go above and beyond. I know some jewelry makers, some wire wrappers make all of their chain. Honestly, I have to make too much inventory to be able to invest that kind of time. But for special pieces, I do make this chain, by hand on any expensive piece. I think, it definitely helps your presentation when you have a nice handmade chain like this. So go ahead and practice it, and then my next video I will show you exactly how I make a clasp for this chain. It's actually very simple, but I'm going to separate those two videos because that clasp can be used for pretty much any closure. So, and that's why I'm not doing it all on this video. So look for that. It's coming up shortly. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. If I can help you, I will certainly do so. And have fun with it. Enjoy it. Thanks, everybody.